No one can look so far. No one can pretend the future. Still one step from us. No one can bend the sun. Half of the world does use a telephone yet. And over here a new generation born with internet. Waiting a mass revolution that they call progress. Live for the old and on the workers. Let's press mobility, no more offices. The world as the workspace. This is what you facing. Face it, embrace it. Mixing over races. Shifting all our forces. New world are the cardinal forces. No one can look so far. No one can pretend the future. Still a one step from us. No one can bend the sun. So find resource as in out of space. Have a microchip installed and your heart replaced. Robotic, modified, genetic code. Without notice, it's time to switch on digital mode. If you are immigrant to the second world, a stranger to its customs, rules and verb, you might witness a cursed generation turn with the devil and eventually you will convert. No one can look so far. No one can pretend the future. Still a one step from us. No one can bend the sun. Oh, typic point is past. Now it's time to adjust. And if you finish last, it means you are part of a dance. No one can look so far. You are part of a dance. No one can pretend the future. Take you forward. Still a one step from us. Give them all of that. No one can bend the sun. Your future is you. No one can look so far. No one can look so far. No one can pretend the future. But I can. Still a one step from us. It's what is inside of me. No one can bend the sun.
Wonderful. That was Future by Jabba WS, a reggae artist in Switzerland. An amazing song, an amazing guy, and I hope you enjoyed that. Let's just show that we're going to have all kinds of music on here and all kinds of performers, and it doesn't matter if you're a musician, a singer-songwriter, a poet, what you do, comedian. You must make sure that your recording is under 5 minutes long and it's a decent quality, not something recorded like, you know, on a Woolworths tape recorder, something, you know, decent quality, because it ultimately will show the quality of your own work. And here we are, that term quality again, because it does help. And so that's the first hour over, and, you know, welcome you back to The Velocity of Now. I'm Thomas Sheridan. It's my new radio show here on the Type 1 Radio Network, and I hope you're enjoying it. My website is www.thomassheridanarts.com. If you'd like to help keep this show going, if you like what you hear tonight and to keep me on the air, then if you could click on the link to the show on the home page and then go to the show page, you'll see there's a donate button there. You can throw me a few bucks at the price of a pizza or something. It all helps, because ultimately, you know, everything costs money these days. Poor artists, a lot of that's my own fault, because I got a big mouth living in a broke, bankrupt IMF vassal state. So, you know, this is this is work here. It's not, I'm not begging. I'm actually working for this, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to be able to continue doing it. If you like what you hear, then I would love your support, and thank you very, very much. Now, one of the things I want to talk about on this show is, and this might surprise people, and I'll be doing this in the weeks to come, is because a lot of people seem to have this idea about me that I'm kind of Mr. Materialistic in some sense. That because I deal with, very sort of grounded things like the psychopaths and issues like that, I have no interest in, sort of like esoteric or supernatural things. I absolutely do. Actually, people will be surprised just how interested in this stuff I really am and have been for many years. I'm a very, very keen Fortean in the true sense, in that I'm very interested in investigating and looking at what they would call supernatural, paranormal, or mystical ideas. But I approach it in the same way that Carl Jung approached it, in that it's not necessarily what it's supposed to be or to be the name given to it, but it provides valuable insights into the state of a culture, into the state of a person, into the state of a society that's going through these things, that witnesses these events. So I don't, I've never seen a UFO, but if I saw one in the sky, I wouldn't immediately jump to my Hollywood predictive programming that the Space Brothers are here, that there's some kind of these are aliens from another planet who have come to the Earth and we're finally ready for contact, or God help us, disclosure. I don't believe those things, but I do believe people do see UFOs, and I do believe that most people who see them have very, very, very sincere, and they're telling the truth, and they should not be ridiculed. They should be respected. Likewise, if I was to see a ghost, and I have seen what is a ghost, I don't automatically assume it's someone's Auntie Mary who's trapped in the between the spirit plane and the other world. It could be something very different. I don't buy into the standard things. The reason why I don't buy into the standard things is because this may surprise people, but I don't believe there's any benevolent beings that are, if these beings do exist, and I do believe they do exist to a certain extent. There is other forms of consciousness, let's put it that way, not necessarily like entities or beings, although they could manifest in those forms. I don't believe any of them are benevolent. In fact, if there's such things as angels, I'm almost certain that's human beings. That's non-psychopathic human beings, that we probably are those enlightened beings. And there's all kinds of hints through theology and mythology to show that we are human beings are probably we are the elves, we are the most highly advanced of all the beings on Earth, on the universe, but there's all kinds of other pathological consciousness that try to tell us we're trash, that tell us we're inferior, that tell us that we were genetically modified by lizards from another world and things like that. They'll tell you anything, and that's the long history of these experiences, that these creatures lie. They all tell lies. That these consciousness, whatever you want to call them, I don't know what they are, but they all lie. They do. They all lie, and they all want human beings having they're gaslighting us, like psychopaths gaslight us. They want us believing things that aren't true. So if you have a paranormal event or experience in your life, don't jump at the sort of surface level understanding that a light in the sky is an alien. It could very well be a government or a secret military project, but it could be something far, far deeper that's very important to your psychological, spiritual development, and you should pay attention to it in the same way, on that level, that you would pay attention to your dreams. So in the next few weeks and months, I'm going to bring in more of that kind of stuff in, looking at it from this way, and hopefully I'm going to have a few guests who, won't be here to tell you that if some alien race they're channeling in the future is the truth of all this. We won't have those kind of people on. We're going to have people who can investigate these things rationally, investigating them without applying any kind of dogma, any kind of belief that we're actually dealing with something specific that's actually a religious idea or a a particular kind of a notion or idea of something having rules, having actual kind of a dogma, scripture, theology connected to it, or even some kind of imposed prejudice coming from the past, where it might be, they're ghosts and they're trapped spirits who are trying to contact us. I think that's a very dangerous trick that's been played on us. I think, one thing I've been looking at a lot lately, very interesting stuff, is the spiritualist movement, which took place in the late Victorian era, mostly in the United States, but also in England and France. Basically, it was a bunch of tops who used to meet and channel spirits. And it really took off after World War One. Not surprisingly, all these distraught families who lost all their sons in the trenches of World War One were trying to contact them and trying to reach them through these mediums. Often these mediums were frauds. Often they were crazy, but sometimes they were often very dangerous. This is something that I'm starting to believe is true, as I've been actually meeting and talking to an exorcist, a real exorcist, believe it or not, in recent times. I bet you never heard me say that, but I have been. And I've been told that sometimes one of the reasons why the Catholic Church is so against doing exorcisms and so against this kind of thing is because, and also channeling entities, is because it operates as a conduit. It operates as a sort of a tunnel that these things can enter this reality and cause chaos and havoc. And the spiritualist movement, I believe, directly gave birth to the horrors that was the 20th century. Whatever happened, these people, or whatever they channel, or whatever psychological changes they got in themselves during these spiritualist, sessions, they seem to have damaged the very fabric of nature of humanity. And that is really the point where you could say, well, the psychopaths started to take in power, because it was during this era we had the J.P. Morgans. It was during this era that we had the Federal Reserve being created. It was during this period that we got the industrialization of warfare, massive economic problems. Genocides really began to take off on an industrial level. We had the growth of pathological systems like Marxism and fascism come to the fore. And I really do believe that this messing with the spiritual stuff is what caused it, because it was happening on a vast scale. It was very fashionable, and it was going on in such a way that the ones who were running society, the tops, the rich, the wealthy, they were the ones doing it. And they were the ones who were ultimately what I believe were infected. Because at some level, I believe the psychopathic thing is highly spiritual. I know this is something I don't normally talk about. It's not something that I really bring up. But because when I wrote my first book, Puzzling People, I wanted to help people. That was my only thing, is I wanted to help people who I knew were absolutely suffering, because I was seeing it. I could see it. You could see that look in Nigella Lawson's eyes in the photographs after she was attacked by that gobshite husband of hers. She had a look on her face where her energy was drained, because that's really what it's about. It's about energy. And her energy was taken. And I believe that, I'm not saying Charles Saatchi is one of these psychopaths, I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that she had that look as if she'd been affected that way. She was affected on a spiritual, energetic level, because that's what happens when you've had your life ravaged by a psychopath. And this is all connected to the same thing. We're having our energy taken by pathological means through psychopathic individuals and situations which seem to be very hardwired over the years to esoteric and mystic ideas. There's just absolutely no denying this. If you look for everything from the Greek mystery praise to the Dionysian cults to the torchlit rituals along the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, not necessarily saying that these things were bad in of themselves, not necessarily saying that these things were created for that purpose, but they spellbound people. They actually absolutely would spellbound people. And that term is very appropriate, because that's exactly what was happening. A spell was being placed upon them. And be it by accident or intent, by default or design, the control system were aware that things could be done to human beings by putting them in certain situations and affecting them with certain stimuli. And then, very importantly, saying, this is what you're dealing with. Because they would give you the answers to what the mystery was. So if you saw a ghost, it was your Auntie Mary. They would never tell you that it could be actually some kind of like negative aspects of consciousness coming to fool you or destroy you. If you saw a UFO in the sky, they would tell you it was aliens from another planet. They wouldn't want you knowing that it was a secret government project developed by the Nazis, or more importantly, that you were actually getting insights, very deep psychological and spiritual insights into the nature of your society that could be very useful if you actually learned how to read these things the right way, instead of being fobbed off by something Gene Roddenberry or George Lucas invented. This is big stuff. This is deep stuff, and this is stuff I want to talk about on this show because I'm sick and tired of this sort of infantile, childish approach to these subjects being brought up, because they're much more deeper than that. We are a lost people in search of a mythology. We are a group that has lost our shamans, but we still have our neuroses. We have no one to guide us, and when we have no one to guide us, we start having these visions. We start seeing these things in the sky. When Carl Jung wrote his book on flying saucers, he was absolutely 100% correct when he said those flying saucers were a result of anxieties and neuroses caused by fears of nuclear weapons being unleashed upon the human race. That's exactly what they were. He nailed it. But of course, they became an enormous propaganda weapon for someone like the United States. The United States, using the whole Roswell fiasco and theater, have created this idea that they had captured alien technology. This was to work on two levels. One, to reassure the American people that the U.S. Air Force and the military had alien technology that could beat the Russians who had gotten themselves a H-bomb. And secondly, it also was a fantastic propaganda to use against the Russians, who also did their own things. This is why the Russians took a big interest in parapsychology and things like telekinesis for the same reason. During that period, the idea was to have this sort of mystical, ability to fox the other side, because they know they're playing on very deep archetypes within the human beings. This is why, Constantine claims to have seen the crucifix in the sky, or whatever it was, the pyro symbol in the sky above the Melbourne Bridge, because they know these things. They know on one level we are materialistic human beings that live in the real world, but at the very deep level, within both poles of cognitive functioning, there is an other aspect to our humanity. And you do not get in there directly. You get in there through dreams, metaphors, allegories, subliminal messages. That's how you get in there. And they've always known this, and they've always targeted that, because they want to control it. Because even if they put a chip in our brain, and people should know this, even if they put a chip in our brain and turn us into automatons, they still cannot ever be able to get to the source. And the source of us as our being is the true person, that ghost in the machine that lies behind the mechanics of our mind, deep in there, who you really are, who hasn't been programmed or, embellished like layers of an onion with manufactured neuroses, cultures, religious beliefs, and so on. The pure aspect of what you are deep inside there, they will never get in there. And by God, that they know it. And that's why they try to destroy us at a soul level. That's why they attack us at a soul level. That's why they send these horrific, churches like, the Vatican to own spirituality so we can have our minds destroyed by Catholic priests raping young boys. This is why they give us religious wars, because they're desperately trying to get it inside us and destroy us at a soul level. It's as simple as that. And your soul is not for negotiation. Your psyche is not for negotiation, because it will not acquiesce to exterior controls. Your mind will, your subconscious won't. And you have to now begin to see that subconscious mind and both poles of cognitive functioning work in tandem. This is why I'm against this idea of destroying the ego that you get in these new age groups, which I also believe are actually CIA fronts. Just about all of them. You do not destroy your ego. You tame your ego. Your ego is wild. Your ego is like a wild stallion or a Mustang that you find in the desert. What you got to do is capture it, harness it, put a saddle on it, and then ride it into the uncharted territories on the map that have yet to be discovered. That's the purpose of your ego. If you destroy your ego or kill your ego, you're never ever going to evolve, move on, and explore. The ego is there to be cherished, but also to be tamed. And the ego must never be allowed to take control, which is why you hold the reins firmly and you keep your feet in the stirrups and you make sure the ego serves you but doesn't control you. It's a very interesting process when you start to understand these things. It's very powerful because you're no longer a child. You see, when you're told by some new age, book or something, or some new age DVD, oh, you must get rid of the ego, you must get rid of this crap, right? What they're really saying is they're saying refer to childhood, refer to stop being an adult, and instead of engaging and mastering this reality, going back to being a helpless little child, I got to get rid of my ego, all that crap, right? You should never do that. And you never listen to these people. The same thing with the creative intention thing and the consciousness. This whole thing is like a secret. Oh, you know what? All I gotta do is think about this shit and it'll happen. Oh, all I gotta do is imagine this stuff and it'll happen. Oh, I'll get in horn knickers if I think about it long enough. Oh, I'll make $1 million if I think it. Doesn't work that way. You show me one thing in creation that doesn't involve an action. Show me one thing. It doesn't exist. Neutrons fly around atoms. Everything is in motion. Everything moves. If you want to go through a door, you turn that handle and you walk through that door. The door doesn't open by itself by wishful thinking. So therefore, these ideas put out in books like The Secret are very, very, very dangerous because they're making you think that all you have to do is think about it. No, it's action, consciousness, and intention working together. All working together to change reality going forward. By God, then you get the changes. What you do is you have to put that little idea out there forward. You have to actually take that step towards your goals, and that those goals will start coming towards you faster than you realize. But you've got to do that, and you do that firstly by losing the fear. Losing the fear. Stop listening to the fear porn. Stop listening to the, we're all doomed, we're all fucked, all that crap. That you have to stop that. That ends. That ends today. And you have to realize that these are not real fears. These are anxieties. See, there's a difference between a fear and an anxiety. Animals don't have anxieties. Animals have fears. Their fears are different. They don't want to be eaten by other animals. They don't want to be caught by human beings. That's different than what we have. We have anxieties. We worry and we fret about things. Anxieties are manufactured neuroses. They're invented and put into our heads. And the reason why they're done is because they make us easy to control. We acquiesce to authority figures. Everything is acquiescing to an authority figure. This is one of the things like hypnotism, right? Let's talk about hypnotism here, right? People say, looking at other, aspects of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and they mention hypnotism. Well, hypnotism isn't an altered state of consciousness. Not at all. It's been shown that's quite the opposite. What hypnosis is an incredible submission to authority. That's all it is. The hypnotist, what the hypnotist absolutely does is not teach the target or put them into an alternate state of consciousness. They create a situation in the brain that probably comes from our education system where they submit to the authority of the hypnotist. And when the hypnotist will tell them anything and they will believe it, will make them do anything. And what's kind of frightening, but also it's a good thing to know, is the more educated a person is, the easier they are to hypnotize. Just think about that. So someone with a PhD is much easier to hypnotize than someone who probably never went to school at all. This is why when hypnotists traveled into Africa and for the first time, they were unable to hypnotize the natives because they did not see these fellows as having an authority over them because they didn't have a Western style of education. The submission to authority, being hypnotized. And this is why you see all these intellectuals and all these academics, and they almost seem like there's something wrong with them. They almost seem like they're not together at all. They don't question anything because they've been so far thrown into their left brain mode. And contrary to popular notions. The whole left-right brain thing has not been debunked at all. In fact, fMRI scans have shown that the right brain idea is stronger than ever. It's just not as simplistic as people like Betty Edwards back in the 1970s said it was. But absolutely, the fundamentals of the left-right brain thing, in terms of the stereotype, there is a lot of truth to that. And if you make the left brain overactive, you make it easier to submit to authority. And this is why highly educated people are easier to hypnotize than ones who are not. This is why revolution comes up from the grassroots. This is why it wasn't the intellectuals of Paris who, rose up against Napoleon III. It was the people in the Paris Commune. The more educated you are, the more you're likely to put a belief package and a wall around this belief that you're somehow better, that you've somehow achieved this and you're going to defend it. And you will submit to authority to keep those three letters after your name. This is why these guys at the Nuremberg trial, so many of them were intellectuals, university professors. Look what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China. Look what happened with Pol Pot in the Khmer Rouge in Kampuchea. It was all the intellectual classes. Pol Pot was a Western intellectual, and yet look what he did in his own people, in his own country. He was educated in, as a Western intellectual in the Paris Commune. This is why you have the likes of George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells saying things like people should be humanely murdered if they don't, agree to the globalist system. The gas of peace they should be given. This is why George Bernard Shaw praised the, Stalin's purges and genocides of groups like the Tatars, because they can't think straight. The system must always be maintained. The idea that human beings are brought down to a mechanical motion. And so I know I've wandered here, but that's really what my attitude towards, supernatural and paranormal ideas are, is that I'm not going to submit to the state-sanctioned ideas of these. I'm going to be like a true Fortean, and I hope you would actually consider this yourself. And even people who may be skeptical or, think it's all bunk and everything. Well, a better way that's the reason why they give these kind of metaphysical and paranormal kind of sci-fi ideas or ghostly ideas. Because they want educated people to ridicule it. But if you start to tell people that within all this stuff, there's something psychologically very, very interesting that can actually help us as a people, then that changes. Then you suddenly get intellectuals and people who are educated interested, because that's something that they want to know as well. That's something that they're curious about. This is why they try to fill the alternative movement with the most ridiculous ideas, that it's aliens and all these other kind of things behind the system. It's not. It's psychopaths. It's psychopaths telling lies. Now, on some level, are these psychopaths wired into these negative states of consciousness? Absolutely they are. I have no doubt about that now more than ever, especially when I see how people are zoned out by the experience of being around a psychopath. There's absolutely a spiritual aspect to it. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. It really does exist. You look at a person who's been through a psychopathic experience, and they look like their energy has been drained out of them. They walk a certain way, they act a certain way. Conversely, you can also tell, and this is why I tell people to stay away from these internet recovery forums, ones who are never anywhere near a psychopath, and yet they're the big screaming drama queens who behave pathologically by whipping up witch hunts. They see psychopaths everywhere. That's why I always say to somebody, if you see somebody who sees psychopaths everywhere, get away from them, because you're dealing with a lunatic or someone who's a psychopath themselves trying to deflect from it. Psychopaths are very, very rare in terms of how our personal lives will encounter them. It's 1 to 4% at the very, very max in Western society. But unfortunately, because this 1 to 4% has reached the top of the pyramid, we're under their control. We're under their, domain. That's a different thing altogether. That's a separate issue completely from people's personal recovery stories after being in a relationship with a psychopath. That's a very, very different thing. But ultimately, the battle for human consciousness is the battle of Armageddon, and it's taking place in the domain of human consciousness. And that's why creativity is everything. That's why if you can't draw, can't paint, or you can't play a piece of music, you can still write a poem. You can do something. You can have a creative idea. You can plant a garden. You can think about things in a different way. You can think about things in a new way. This is insurgency. This is the beauty of this. This is, in Orwell's 1984, when Winston Smith was in room 101, O'Brien says to him, "You chose to be a lunatic, Winston." Very, very insightful line. See, Winston Smith's lunacy was severalfold. On one level, his lunacy was that he refused to acquiesce to the fascist tyrannical system that he was living under. His second act of lunacy was putting his faith in the belief that there was an underground, or there was going to be salvation from external forces. His belief that O'Brien was going to save him and not betray him. His belief that there actually was a real resistance, and that was going to save him. That's the real story of George Orwell's 1984. That Winston Smith and Julia failed because they put their faith, instead of being in themselves, they put their faith in a belief that someone was going to save them. And that belief in external salvation is the reason why the pathological system of Big Brother came into power. Because people lost faith in their own ability to be creators. They handed it all over to authority and to the control system until they found themselves living in hell. Don't find yourself living in hell. And that spark of creativity at the beginning of 1984, where Orwell writes, "Down with Big Brother" at the top of the page, an act for which he could be vaporized or shot. Terrifying, forbidden, but he still wrote "Down with Big Brother" on the first page of the diary. And then he wrote "Down with Big Brother" again, and it felt easier the second time. And then he wrote "Down with Big Brother" the third time, and it came more naturally. And then his consciousness opened. That was the point that Winston Smith stopped being a slave. It didn't matter if Oceana or Airstrip 1 wasn't free. It didn't matter, because the fact that Winston Smith had wrote those words in that book, he was a free man at that moment. He was a free man. It didn't matter. He didn't need the resistance. He didn't need the underground. He didn't need O'Brien. He didn't need Goldstein. He had already attained freedom. He had freed his consciousness. And before he knew it, he'd written "Down with Big Brother" on the bottom of the page and filled in the whole page, because his subconscious had taken over. And then what Winston Smith did then was to put himself back in prison, tragically, by believing that an external system, rather than his psyche, remember psyche is the Greek word for the soul, rather than his internal being, his own self, depending upon that and living within there, wanted to believe that there was a popular resistance movement. There wasn't. The popular resistance movement, like all revolutions, are designed for one thing and one thing only: to bring you back to where you started, to bring you back to where you began. That's why we don't have revolution, we have evolution. Evolution is not dependent upon linear time. Evolution is not a 2D process like revolution. Evolution is a 3D expansive process that grows like a seed and blossoms outwards. It doesn't travel along a fixed course. It's flexible. It can alter. It can change. It can adapt. Revolution doesn't adapt. Revolution is the turning of the wheel. The turning of the wheel to take you back to where you were at the beginning. Evolution, anything can happen, because that's how evolution works. Everything and anything should happen. And when novelty is created from that, that's when salvation is found. And salvation is not found through evolving yourself into a control system, a method, a structure, a constitution, or a dogma. Evolution happens when you look inside yourself and you write "Down with Big Brother" at the top of the page, and before you know it, you've completed at the bottom. That's when you're free. That's when you're liberated. And you must keep, if Winston Smith had have kept that forever, he would have died a free man without having to go to Rule 101. And Orwell knew that. Orwell had been led into the abyss of a belief in Marxism until he went into Spain during the Spanish Civil War and found that the communism was no different than fascism. The exact same people with different badges were pulling the strings at the top. The exact same people were controlling it all. And that was Orwell's message to us. I have a lot of sympathy for Orwell. A lot of people think that George Orwell was some kind of elitist who was telling us the plan. I actually believe he was a whistleblower. Aldous Huxley was an elitist telling us the plan. And it's ironic that the two of them are both at Eton. But Orwell wasn't. Orwell was actually telling us, look, this is how the way out, and the way out of it is very different than what Huxley was proposing. The way out of it was not to get hooked up into a system, not to allow yourself to be hooked up to a central computer, not to allow yourself to be chemically, controlled by the state as many people are today, but to go inside, because that's where the battle takes place. And where you don't win a revolution on a battlefield if you're on the wrong battlefield. And this is why I think, I know that protesting is pointless, because you can protest all you want, you can march all you want, but that's not where the battle is taking place. That's not where you're being attacked. Where you're being attacked is in your own human consciousness. And if you can beat that there, then you've beaten them everywhere. And this is what makes this whole movement so powerful, is that we can all do this independently, one by one ourselves. You can be sitting in the middle of nowhere, be surrounded by rednecks, idiots, morons, racist, gobshites, whatever you want to call them, who think you're a fool and don't like you. It doesn't matter. You don't need their approval, just like you don't need the approval of psychopaths. The only approval you need is your own. When you go inside yourself, you're already winning. They can't get in there. There's this thing in our brains called mirror neurons. This is why it's very important that we go to talks and we go to events organized by the consciousness movement. Not just me, not when I'm coming out to speak, but other people. Because what happens is, if you have these creative thoughts inside yourself, and we're all synced on the same level, the mirror neurons in the room will start to fire in synchronization. And the next thing you know, you're no longer alone. You're part of a movement. And the most interesting thing about that is, just as much as pathology can spread and contaminate a control system, so can evolution. And positive evolution can do it as well. I've seen it in my own eyes. That's what I noticed more than anything else when I came back to those events for the second time in England, is how everyone's mirror neurons were firing in sync. And the confidence of a few was helping the confidence of many. And that's why I totally support all these people who put together these events and these talks. And as long as the speakers, their intention is good and in the right place, and they're not telling you to believe in false, dogmas or spirits or anything like that, but telling you to believe in yourself, then you're on a winning team. You're going to make it, because that's the battlefield you're fighting on now. You're not waving a flag. You're not following a guru. You're not following a constitution. You're following yourself. This is what they talk about when they say the heart, following from the heart. What they really mean is following from the consciousness. That's where you're really coming from, the psyche, as the Greeks called it, the word for soul. So the soul battle. And you have soul brothers and sisters. And that's who the people who are alongside us. And what's so beautiful is we're all from different backgrounds, races, religions. It doesn't matter. Who cares? It doesn't matter. They hate that. They want to create factions. This is why what they did in Woolwich. This is why they did what they did everywhere. They want to create factions. Somebody pointed out to me in England recently what happened at Woolwich. The whole thing seemed to be demonizing black Muslims. Muslims who are black-skinned. There's a reason for this. They were trying to create factions within Islam, between dark-skinned Muslims and light-skinned Muslims, because that's one of the powers of Islam, the fact that it's all-inclusive in terms of racial identity. You're a Muslim no matter what color you are. And they're trying desperately to create factions within Islam. They want factions because it's the old divide and conquer routine. They want splitters. They want the popular fronts of Judea and the Judean popular front. Well, let's not give them any popular front. So I think I'm going to take a break for another song here. This is the third and final song. This is a really nice song, and it's by an Irish band called The Other Ones. And the song is called RC Lo-Fi, and it's a very spiritual sounding song, and I'm glad this is the final one because it ties in perfectly with this. And so this is RC Lo-Fi by the Other Ones. Lovely. That was RC Lo-Fi by the Other Ones. Reminds me a lot of the Verve, that. I could hear Richard Ashcroft singing that. It was a beautiful song. I really like that song. So that was the third song of the evening, and Thank you for those. They asked for. I'll recap your names at the end for contributing to that. Again, creativity, insight, imagination, and how you process it affects reality. Now, you hear a lot of stuff about, I just have to, imagine things, or my intentions will manifest in reality. Well, that's absolutely true. And you hear people say things about quantum physics and all that, but it's not that easy. Don't kid yourself that you just have to think that something's going to happen and it's going to happen. The structure of what we call reality, the subatomic fabric of this electromagnetic 5-sense spectrum which we are caught within is very, very solid. The subatomic particles are so densely packed that in order to affect reality, it takes tremendous work, concentration. But it does happen. It does happen. Now, I told you I'm very interested in 40 and stuff and this kind of thing. I know I don't talk about it much, but I am. And one of the most amazing stories for me, and I was told about this years ago. I was told this story years ago, and then it was sort of like I found out that it was absolutely true. And I think it was in a John Keel book I discovered. But there was a series of books, or comic books that were on radio broadcasts back in the US in the 1940s called The Shadow. It was a very, very, very popular series. It was huge, and very interesting that it was called The Shadow because it manifested around the same time that Jung became really popular. And again, the archetypes always come spilling through. The Shadow was a kind of a detective kind of character. Now, the guy who wrote those stories was a fiction writer called Walter Gibson, and he wrote literally hundreds and hundreds of shadow stories. He was a phenomenally productive writer. The stuff just flowed out of him. Very popular stories. And he lived in an apartment in Greenwich Village in the west side of Manhattan. And for years afterwards, and still continuing to this day, but it was really brought out in the 1980s, people who live in the apartment where Roger Gibson wrote all his shadow stories constantly reported seeing a shadow moving through the apartment, appearing on walls, coming down the stairs, that was exactly like the shadow involved in Gibson's stories. It was a cloaked figure who wore a kind of it was not like a fedora hat, it was one of those, like the larger version of those hats, kind of like what I don't know what you call them, but a wide-peaked, wide-rimmed hat. And this guy would be seen all over the building as a shadow on the wall. And that's, as Gibson was in that building writing those books, and according to John Keel, the great Fortean writer, who wrote The Mothman Prophecy, which is actually a very good book. If you read the book, the film's not bad, but the book is phenomenal. He said to speculate that Gibson's extreme concentration, creating the shadow stories, churning out these thousands and thousands of pages of stories, coupled with the creative attention put upon it by his readers, that it actually changed reality to create this shadow that to this day, I won't say haunts, but inhabits this particular building that Gibson lived in Lower Manhattan. And that's an example of how creative intention could, this is just speculation now, alter the very fabric of reality to change it. This is why people under extreme trauma are able to lift cars off their children. Housewives, you always hear this story. This is why in the heat of battle, that pivotal scene at the beginning of the Tom Hanks movie, Saving Private Ryan. Amongst all the violence suddenly happens, he goes into a kind of an altered state of consciousness, very well portrayed by Steven Spielberg. This altered state of consciousness is shown in the film in slow motion. The soldiers will tell you this. Then in places like D-Day and Omaha Beach and, Stalingrad, another place of intense violence, soldiers would be in the most incredible battles where bullets were flying in every direction. And for some incredible reason, they managed to survive. They were not killed, but they all have the same story, that time seemed to stop still, that they found themselves not living in this world, but almost walking through a dream. And like in a dream where you don't get really killed, they weren't killed in the battle. And though the odds were incredibly stacked against them, not surviving or being hit by a bullet, they would come out of these states of altered consciousness and find themselves in a foxhole or up against a wall or under a tank or behind a truck or inside a building, and not knowing how they got there, and everyone else would be dead. That was the extreme trauma of the moment of battle, shifting them into an altered state of consciousness, where who knows what may have happened. They may have absolutely, or maybe not, left this reality on a temporary basis and survived what should have killed them, only to find themselves alive when they shouldn't have been alive. They changed the nature of reality, did they? I think there's a lot of evidence to prove they probably did. There's a lot of things like this have happened through history, where people have survived things like falling into rivers and freezing cold rivers and going into kind of a suspended animation and should have been dead, but they survived. People who can walk on fire in the Vedas, in the Hindu stories, are full of these kinds of things. The suspension of reality, the ability to shift out of this 5-sense electromagnetic spectrum and move into something else. The Walter Gibson's shadow appearing on the walls of the building in Manhattan could be very good proof of that. But there's other things too. I've seen Native American dances where they did actually change the weather. I can remember when I was a kid, there was a very hot summer in this part of the world, and they brought some Indian holy men to somewhere in England, in the Midlands of England, and the thing was they were going to pray for rain using some particular prayer from the Vedas. And, the BBC, I think it was ITV actually, went along to sort of like show it as like a cutesy sort of, one of those ridiculous sort of like, human interest stories to show at the end of the news. And for the first time in months, right in front of the cameras on a clear blue sky, these guys caused a massive downpour where there was no clouds. And the sky suddenly filled up with clouds while they were doing this chanting. And there was an incredible rainstorm. And of course, they're like, ho, 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 just by chance, the rain fell. So everyone was happy, and they'd be sort of faces on these Indian guys, these old Indian guru guys. The look of joy on their faces was not that they were like, we are amazing, we made it rain. It was more like, isn't magic great? Isn't magic fun? Isn't magic amazing? They were like little kids. Because that culture probably still understands that magic is a real thing, and you can actually change the world through magic. In later shows, I'll be talking a lot about magic, but magic is used against us by the control system. But the magic they use against us is a psychopathic magic. It's a very, very different thing altogether. But it's still the same kind of magic. But once you know how it works, then you're not subject to their magic. You're actually able to rise above it. I mean, I've had experiences like that I can't explain in a rational sense, but I can go into mythology, I can go into works on the paranormal, I can go into the works of Carl Jung and William Reich and other people like that, even Nietzsche to a certain extent. Even artists are a phenomenal repository. The life stories of artists like, Edvard Munch are an enormous repository into the insight into mysterious events in lives. William Blake, wow, There's a man that if there was some person in history I'd want to sit down and have a pint with, it would be William Blake and have a chat with the guy. Now, William Blake, if he was around today, he'd be considered a nutcase. He'd be pumped full of psychotropic medications, given all kinds of electroshock therapy, diagnosed with all the ridiculous letters out of the DSM manual, and then put in a corner and then nothing happened. Now you look at what William Blake's legacy is. He changed the nature of reality. The national anthem of England today is a poem that he wrote, the unofficial national anthem. His artwork is still inspiring people. It literally created comic books. Comic book artists, he was the one that kind of first created it. And you look at all those kinds of things. You look at, God love him, poor, Vincent van Gogh. That guy was painting what was to be, quantum physics 20 or 30 years before it happened. You look at his paintings, he was reaching out, he was understanding, he was getting there. But like I mentioned about us in the Wakened community, that we may not see the fruits of our labors in our time, but just like Van Gogh didn't see the fruits of his labor in our time, in his time, didn't matter. It still happened. He still did it. His creativity was the buffer to the pathological nonsense created by the materialists and the spiritualists who are like, summoning up demons from the dark and calling them, ghosts, and flooding the world with all this poison, flooding consciousness with all this toxic poison, and giving what the Islamics call the jinn access into this reality. This is why it's very important what you believe. I would say to people, don't believe anything. I would say the only thing you can actually believe is what you see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears and seeing right in front of you. If it's on a YouTube video, it's not necessarily true. To the newspaper, it's almost certainly not true. But if you see it in front of your own eyes, you cannot deny it. You cannot deny the sanctity and the integrity of the natural world. You cannot deny the sanctity and integrity of your own feelings, even if you're considered a lunatic. It's better to be a lunatic in an insane world than being a conformist in an insane world. This is why we learn from our teachers. This is why the shamans of the West, although we don't have them anymore, they really were people like Nietzsche. They were people like Van Gogh, and they were absolutely people like William Blake. They were our shamans. They were guiding us not physically and personally in an individual case, but their legacy, the art that they created, is what has saved us, because we are part of a continuum. We are part of a continuum that began a long, long time ago when the first cave artists picked up soot or red ochre from the bottom of the floor of a building, of a damn cave in France, and they literally and quite spectacularly began to manifest the next level of human consciousness. Kubrick showed that to us in 2001: A Space Odyssey. He wasn't interested in Dave until he saw Dave sketching the inside of the spaceship. Hal, who was the psychopathic, transhumanist, technocrat, techno-robot, techno-psychopath, knew that he could not control Dave because Dave had a spirit of an artist. He had the soul of an artist. He was pulling from source. He wasn't reading the manual. He was sketching, and that's why Hal in 2001 took a very specific interest in Dave's creativity. It's the same reason why they're taking an interest in all our creativity. And the same reason why I'm going to use this program, and hopefully you use your lives to create something that's pure from source and quality. So thanks for listening for the last 2 hours. Wow, that went amazingly fast. I didn't have a script when I came into this. I hadn't got a clue, and I was literally shaking before the show started, but I'm glad I didn't, because I think these streams of consciousness are actually more useful than following a script. I think, be like James Joyce, just follow the stream of consciousness, like when Stephen Dedalus was walking the beach, walking into eternity on Sandymount Strand. He closed his eyes and saw. That's what he said, close your eyes and see. So this was The Velocity of Now, the debut